I got married 3 weeks ago, or at least I tried to. What actually happened was the most public character assassination I've ever witnessed. And it happened to me, orchestrated by my own parents, in front of everyone I know. Let me back up because this needs context. I'm 28, I work as a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm, I have my own apartment downtown, and I was supposed to marry Marina, the woman I'd been with for 4 years. Marina's family isn't wealthy, but they're solid people. Her dad manages a tire shop, her mom works at the school district. My parents, they're the kind of people who measure success by your last name and your country club membership. My dad runs a dental practice, my mom does interior design for rich clients, and they've spent my entire life disappointed that I didn't become a surgeon or marry someone from their social circle. Marina and I met through mutual friends at someone's birthday thing. She was funny and real, and didn't care that I drove a 2015 Toyota or that my apartment had IKEA furniture. My parents hated her from day one, not because she did anything wrong, but because her family didn't vacation in Europe and her last name wasn't hyphenated. My mom kept making comments about how I should focus on my career before settling down. My dad would bring up his colleague's daughter who went to law school. It was constant. When I proposed, they went cold. Like actually cold. My mom stopped returning Marina's texts about wedding planning. My dad told me I was making a mistake, that I was too young, that Marina wasn't ambitious enough. I told them if they couldn't be supportive, they didn't have to come. That's when they switched tactics and suddenly became super involved, offering to pay for part of the venue, insisting they wanted to be there. I thought maybe they'd finally accepted it. I was so stupid. The wedding was at this nice event space with floor-to-ceiling windows. Marina looked incredible in her dress that her mom had helped her pick out, and we had 200 people there, friends from college, co-workers, Marina's huge extended family, my parents' friends from their social circle. Everything was going fine. The ceremony was beautiful. We did the first dance. Marina's dad gave this really sweet toast about how his daughter had found someone who made her laugh every day. Then my father stood up. He didn't ask for the mic. He just walked up to the DJ booth during dinner service and took it. I remember seeing him and thinking maybe he was going to do a toast, even though that wasn't planned. Marina squeezed my hand and smiled, because she thought the same thing. My dad started talking about how he wanted to share some truths about his son before everyone celebrated too much. His tone was wrong immediately. Not warm, not joking. Cold, clinical. He said he'd tried to stop this wedding privately, but since I wouldn't listen, everyone deserved to know who they were celebrating. Then he just destroyed me. He told 200 people that I was a worthless piece of garbage who had failed at everything I'd ever tried. He said I'd dropped out of college twice, which isn't true. I changed majors once and finished in 5 years. He said I'd been fired from 12 jobs. I've had 4 jobs since graduation and left 3 of them on good terms for better opportunities. He said I still lived in my parents' basement playing video games all day. I haven't lived with them since I was 22. People were staring. The room got weird and tense, but nobody knew what to do. Marina's hand went tight in mine and I could feel her shaking. I stood up to grab the mic, but my mother was already coming from the other side. She took the mic from my dad and started screaming. Not talking, screaming. She told everyone I'd stolen $50,000 from my grandmother. Never happened. My grandma is alive and I see her every month. She said I'd cheated on every woman I'd ever dated. Also not true. I've had 3 serious relationships before Marina, and they all ended normally. Then she said they'd caught me trying to sell family heirlooms online to pay off gambling debts. I don't gamble. I've never stolen anything. None of this was real, but here's the thing about public lies. They don't need to be true. They just need to be loud. And my parents were loud. My mom kept going, talking about how they'd tried to get me help, how they'd covered for me for years, how embarrassed they were. People had their phones out. Some of Marina's relatives were standing up looking confused and angry. My dad took the mic back and said they couldn't in good conscience let Marina marry me without knowing the truth about what kind of man I really was. Marina's father stood up and started walking toward the front. Marina was crying, pulling on my arm, asking me what was happening, if any of it was true. I kept saying no, none of it. They're lying. But how do you defend yourself against that? How do you stand there in front of everyone you know and prove a negative? Marina's dad got to my father and shoved him. Not hard, just enough to make him step back. He told my dad he was out of his mind, demanded to know why he was doing this. My mom called Marina's dad low class and said his daughter had trapped me into this wedding. That's when Marina's mom got involved, and it turned into this screaming match between our parents while everyone watched. Marina's father grabbed my mother's arm to pull her away from the mic, and my dad grabbed his shoulder. They were both yelling. The DJ cut the music. People were filming everything. Everything. Multiple phones out recording this absolute disaster. Marina's dad finally got my parents back from the mic and told them to leave. My father said they weren't going anywhere until people knew the truth. That's when Marina's mom stepped in and slapped me across the face. Just walked up and slapped me, while my own mother nodded like I deserved it. Marina's father grabbed Marina by her arm and started pulling her toward the exit. She was crying, asking what was happening, looking back at me. I tried to follow, but Marina's mom blocked me and said I wasn't coming near her daughter. The whole family left, just walked out. Marina's dress train caught on something as her dad pulled her through the door and it ripped. I stood there in my tuxedo in front of 200 people, while my parents told everyone not to leave, that they'd paid for dinner, that people should stay and eat, like it was a normal reception, like they hadn't just blown up my entire life. Most people left. Some of Marina's friends stayed long enough to shoot me. Looks like I was garbage. A few of my friends came up and asked what the hell that was about, if my parents were having some kind of breakdown. I couldn't even answer, I just walked out. The videos went up that night. I had people texting me before I even got back to my apartment. Clips of my dad calling me worthless. My mom screaming about the grandmother money. Marina's dad shoving my father. Marina's mom slapping me. All of it from multiple angles. Posted on Instagram, Facebook, sent around in group chats. Someone even made a TikTok with text overlay like it was entertainment. I tried calling Marina, but she wouldn't answer. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, nothing. I drove to her apartment the next morning and her father was outside. He told me to leave or he'd call the police. Said his daughter didn't need a con artist and a thief in her life. I told him none of it was true, but he said my own parents wouldn't lie about that stuff, that something had to be wrong with me. Marina blocked me on everything. Phone, social media, all of it. Her friends blocked me. Her family blocked me. I sent her messages through people we both knew trying to explain, but nobody would listen. The videos had spread so far that people who weren't even at the wedding were sending me messages asking if I really stole from my grandmother. I lost Marina. I lost the life we were supposed to have. And my parents went back to their normal routines like they'd done nothing wrong. Here's what nobody knows. I spent the last 3 weeks planning. I'm not sad anymore. I was sad for maybe 4 days, then I got angry. The kind of angry that doesn't go away, it just focuses. I started documenting everything, and I mean everything. Timeline of my employment with offer letters and recommendation letters from former managers. My college transcripts showing I graduated. Bank statements proving I never stole anything. Character references from people who've known me for years. My grandmother on camera saying I've never taken money from her and she has no idea why anyone would say that. I compiled proof of every lie my parents told. Every single one. I made copies. I organized it all into folders with dates and sources. Then I sent out the golden envelopes. Everyone who was at that wedding got one. My parents' friends, their country club buddies, their colleagues, my extended family, Marina's family. Inside each envelope was a letter explaining that everything my parents said was a coordinated lie, along with documentation proving it. Employment verification, financial records, statements from people who know me. But here's the part I'm excited about. I also included information about why they did it. See, I did some digging into my parents' perfect image. Turns out my dad's dental practice has been bleeding patients for 2 years because of his attitude. Turns out my mom lost 3 major design clients in the last year because she's impossible to work with. Turns out they're both deeply insecure people who measure their worth by controlling their kids and maintaining appearances. I included details about how they've been telling people I'm a doctor for years. How they've been lying about my career because they're embarrassed I didn't go to medical school. How they made up a fake life for me to tell their friends because the real one wasn't impressive enough. The envelopes went out yesterday. I sent them priority mail so they'd all arrive around the same time. My parents have no idea yet. Marina's family has no idea yet. But they will soon. And I can't wait to watch what happens next. Update 1. Holy hell, you guys, the envelopes arrived and everything has exploded. If you thought my first post was drama, buckle up because this is where it gets really messy. So the envelopes went out priority mail on Monday. They started arriving Wednesday morning. I knew this because my phone started going off at like 8 a.m. Not from my parents. They apparently hadn't checked their mail yet. But from my Aunt Linda, my dad's sister, who lives across town. She called me directly. Didn't text, didn't ease into it. Just called and started talking the second I answered. She said she got my envelope and read everything and wanted to know why I didn't tell anyone this was happening. She said my parents had been telling the family for weeks that I was having some kind of mental breakdown, that I'd become obsessed with this girl from a bad family, that they tried to intervene at the wedding because they were worried about me. That stopped me cold. They'd been laying groundwork. They'd been telling people I was unstable before the wedding even happened. My aunt said my mom had called her crying 2 days before the ceremony, saying they didn't know what to do, that I wouldn't listen to reason, that they were afraid I was going to ruin my life. My parents had literally pre-emptied any defense I might have by making me look crazy first. I told my aunt everything in the envelope was true and verifiable. She said she believed me, but that my uncle Ron, my mom's brother, was already calling family members saying I'd sent fake documents and was trying to destroy my parents' reputation because they tried to stop me from making a mistake. She said the family was splitting into camps and it was getting ugly fast. By noon, my phone was chaos. Texts, calls, voicemails from relatives I barely talked to. Some believing me, some demanding I apologize to my parents, some asking why I was airing family business like this. My cousin Jeremy, who I actually like, sent me a long text saying he believed me, but his parents were furious and had told him not to contact me. Family members were literally being told to choose sides. My parents didn't call until 2 p.m. I knew the second I saw my dad's number that they'd finally opened their envelope. I almost didn't answer, but then I thought, no, I want this conversation. I want to hear them try to defend themselves. My dad didn't even say hello. He just started in about how I'd gone too far, how I was trying to humiliate them. How dare I send lies about them to their friends and colleagues? I asked him what lies specifically. He said all of it. Everything in the envelope was twisted or taken out of context. I asked him to explain how employment verification letters and bank statements could be twisted. He said I'd manipulated the documents somehow, that I was clearly having some kind of episode. Here's where it got interesting. My dad said they'd done what they did at the wedding for me, because they loved me, because they couldn't watch me throw his life away on someone so beneath me. He actually said beneath me. He said Marina's family was lower class and unstable, and that her father had gotten violent at the wedding, conveniently forgetting that he'd grabbed Marina's dad first. He said they were trying to save me from making a mistake I'd regret forever. I told him they'd lied about me to 200 people. He said they'd told the truth in the only way people would listen to, that I'd been making bad decisions for years and wouldn't hear any feedback, so they had to take drastic action. He made it sound like an intervention instead of a public execution. My mom got on the line. She was crying, but it was that angry crying where you know the person isn't sad, they're furious. She said I'd betrayed them, that after everything they'd done for me, paying for part of my education, even after I changed majors, helping me with my first apartment deposit, introducing me to professional contacts, this was how I repaid them, by humiliating them in front of their community. I asked her about the $50,000 she said I stole from Grandma. She said that was an exaggeration to make a point. An exaggeration. She'd told 200 people I was a thief and now she was calling it an exaggeration. I asked what point she was trying to make. She said I needed to understand the seriousness of what I was doing, marrying someone so wrong for me, and that sometimes you have to use dramatic language to get through to people. I told them both they'd destroyed my relationship. My mom said if the relationship couldn't survive the truth, it wasn't meant to be. I said it wasn't the truth, it was lies. She said the essential truth was that Marina wasn't right for me, and they'd done what parents do, protect their children. The call ended with my dad saying if I didn't retract the envelopes and apologize publicly, they'd have no choice but to defend themselves properly. I told him to do whatever he needed to do. He hung up. Then things got weirder. My parents started their own counteroffensive. They didn't send physical letters, but they started making calls. Lots of calls. They called people who'd gotten my envelopes and gave their version. That I'd had a breakdown. That the wedding situation had been them trying to stop me from making a terrible mistake in a moment of mental confusion. That I was now lashing out with forged documents and lies because I was embarrassed and angry. My mom called her book club friends. My dad called his golf buddies and his dental association contacts. They were systematic about it. And here's the thing. Some people believed them. Not everyone, but enough. Because parents don't usually destroy their kids publicly unless something is really wrong, right? So maybe I was unstable. Maybe the documents I sent were fake or misleading. My Uncle Ron started a group chat with extended family members. Didn't include me, obviously, and apparently spent hours arguing that I was having a mental health crisis and needed help, not encouragement. My cousin Jeremy sent me screenshots. Ron was saying I'd always been difficult, that I'd always pushed back against my parents' guidance, that this was the culmination of years of concerning behavior. Meanwhile, Marina's family received envelopes too. I knew this because Marina's younger sister Bianca, who I'd always gotten along with, sent me a message on Instagram, not a friendly message. She said her family got the envelope and her parents had a huge fight about it. Her dad was still convinced I was bad news because my own parents had said those things. Her mom was less sure now but didn't know what to believe. Bianca said Marina had looked at the documents and cried for an hour but wouldn't talk about it. She said Marina still had me blocked and wasn't ready to hear from me. That hurt more than I expected. Even with proof, even with documentation, Marina couldn't bring herself to reach out. I get it. Her world got blown up too, but I'd been waiting for some sign she'd listened, that she'd seen the truth. Nothing. Thursday afternoon, my parents showed up at my apartment. Just showed up. I was working from home and heard knocking. I looked through the peephole and there they were. I thought about not opening the door, but I'd started this and I wasn't going to hide from them. I opened the door and my dad pushed past me into my living room. My mom followed. Neither of them asked if they could come in. They just entered like they owned the place. My dad looked around at my apartment, which I've lived in for 3 years, like he was seeing it for the first time. He commented that it was smaller than he remembered. My mom sat on my couch without being invited. My dad said they needed to talk about how to fix this situation. I said there was nothing to fix from my end. My mom said I'd made things worse by sending those envelopes, that people were talking, that their friends were asking questions, that my dad's practice had gotten phone calls. I asked what kind of phone calls. She said people wanting to know if the family was okay, if there was trouble, if the wedding situation was as bad as people were saying. My dad said a few patients had called to cancel appointments. Not many, just a few, but enough to be concerning. He said people were uncomfortable and didn't want to get involved in family drama. He blamed me for that. Said if I'd just accepted their judgment about Marina and moved on quietly, none of this would be happening. I asked him if he thought ruining my wedding was moving on quietly. He said they'd done what needed to be done, and I was the one who'd escalated by sending documentation to their entire social circle. My mom added that I'd included details about their business problems that were private and nobody's concern. She was talking about the part where I mentioned my dad losing patients and my mom losing design clients. Here's where I realized something. They weren't sorry. They weren't even pretending to be sorry. They were angry at me for exposing them. They genuinely believed they'd been in the right and I'd betrayed them by fighting back. My dad kept saying he was my father and he knew what was best for me. My mom kept saying they'd sacrificed so much to raise me properly, and this was how I treated them. I told them to leave. My dad said we weren't done talking. I walked to the door and opened it. Told them again to leave. My mom started crying, real crying this time, saying she didn't recognize me anymore, that I'd changed, that Marina had turned me against my own family. I said Marina had nothing to do with this, that they'd destroyed my relationship all on their own. My dad said if the relationship was so weak it couldn't handle a little truth. It wasn't worth having. A little truth. He actually called what they did a little truth. They finally left, but not before my dad said this wasn't over, that they were going to make sure people knew the real story. I said I'd sent the real story already. He said we'd see about that. Friday brought more complications. My grandmother, my dad's mom, the one they'd accused me of stealing from, apparently got wind of what was happening through Aunt Linda. She called me Friday morning, upset and confused. She said she'd heard there was some kind of family emergency and wanted to know if I was all right. I had to explain the whole situation to her. She was horrified. She said she'd call my father immediately and straighten this out. She did call him. I know because my dad called me an hour later furious. He said I'd gotten Grandma involved and now she was questioning him, asking why he'd said those things about me when he knew they weren't true. He said I'd upset an elderly woman for no reason. I pointed out he'd upset her by lying about her grandson stealing from her. He said that was different. That was necessary to make a point. I asked what point required lying about theft. He didn't have an answer, just hung up. But Grandma calling him did something. It made it real for him in a way the envelopes hadn't. Because Grandma isn't part of his social circle, she's his mother. And she was disappointed in him. I could hear it in his voice when he called. Underneath the anger was something else. Shame, maybe. Or fear that his own mother was seeing him clearly for the first time. The weekend was a nightmare of messages. Extended family members arguing in group chats. My parents' friends reaching out asking for my side of the story, then disappearing when I told them. Marina's family apparently having their own internal fights about whether to believe the documents or trust their first impression of me. And through it all, Marina stayed silent. Still blocked? Still unreachable. Sunday night, I got a message from my dad's business partner, Luke, who I'd met a few times at family events. He said he'd heard there was family trouble and wanted to make sure everything was okay with the practice. I didn't understand at first why he was asking me instead of my dad. Then he explained. Patients had been calling the office asking questions, wanting to know if my dad was reliable, if there was instability. The wedding videos had spread far enough that some of his patients had seen them. They were concerned about having a dentist who'd publicly attacked his own son that way. Luke said he wasn't taking sides, but he needed to know if this was going to impact the practice. I told him I had no intention of causing problems for the business, that my issue was with my parents' personal behavior, not their professional work. He seemed relieved, but said he'd be keeping an eye on things. Then he said something that stuck with me. He said my parents had always presented themselves as having a perfect family, that my dad talked about me like I was some kind of success story, and seeing the reality had been jarring for people who thought they knew them. That's when I realized the envelopes had done more than just clear my name. They'd cracked my parents' perfect image, and that image was everything to them. This morning, my mom's brother, Uncle Ron, sent me a message saying I needed to think about what I was doing to the family. He said families keep problems private, that airing things publicly was destroying relationships that could never be repaired. He said even if my parents had made mistakes at the wedding, I was making it worse by retaliating. He wanted me to consider family therapy, mediation, anything to stop this from spreading further. I told him I'd consider mediation when my parents admitted what they did was wrong and apologized publicly. He said I was being unrealistic, that parents don't apologize to their children like that I needed to be the bigger person. I said I was done being the bigger person while they faced no consequences. He hasn't responded. The thing is, I thought sending the envelopes would feel satisfying, like vindication. But it's messier than I expected. Some people believe me completely. Some people think I'm crazy and my parents were right to intervene. Most people are somewhere in the middle, uncomfortable and unsure who to believe. My parents are fighting back hard, framing this as them trying to help their troubled son who's now attacking them for it. And Marina still won't talk to me. That's the part that kills me. I can handle my parents hating me. I can handle extended family drama. But I can't handle that. She got those documents proving everything they said was a lie, and she still can't reach out. My parents said this wasn't over. They're right. It's not even close to over. Update 2. You guys, this situation has spiraled into territory I didn't even anticipate. The envelope fallout was just the beginning. Now it's turned into all-out family warfare, and my parents are getting desperate. Quick recap for anyone new. My parents destroyed my wedding by publicly lying about me to 200 guests. I sent documentation proving they lied to everyone involved, and now half the family thinks I'm right and half thinks I'm having a breakdown. Marina still has me blocked. My parents are fighting back hard. So here's what's happened since my last update. Tuesday morning, I got a call from my Aunt Linda again. She said the family was planning Thanksgiving at my Uncle Ron's house like they do every year, and that everyone was extremely uncomfortable about whether I'd be there. She said my parents were insisting they'd be attending, and if I showed up, it would create a scene. She asked if I could maybe skip this year to keep the peace. I told her absolutely not. I've gone to family Thanksgiving for 28 years, and I wasn't about to let my parents intimidate me out of it. She sighed and said she understood, but that I should know my parents were telling people I'd become volatile and unpredictable. She said my mom had called several relatives crying about how worried she was about my mental state, and how scared she was that I might do something extreme at a family gathering. They were still pushing the mental breakdown narrative, even after I'd sent proof of everything. They were doubling down and trying to make people afraid of me. I told Aunt Linda that if my parents were so worried about me causing a scene, maybe they should stay home. She said that wasn't realistic, that they were still my parents and they had every right to be at family events. I said I had the same right. She said she knew, but couldn't I be the bigger person here and just let things cool down? I told her I was done being the bigger person while my parents faced zero consequences for what they did. That conversation ended badly. She said she was trying to help and I was making it impossible. I said if she wanted to help, she could tell my parents to admit what they did. She said parents and children don't work that way, that there's a natural hierarchy, and I needed to respect it even when I disagreed. I hung up. Wednesday afternoon, my dad's business partner Luke called me again. This time he wasn't checking in. He was concerned. He said 3 more patients had canceled their appointments and specifically cited the wedding situation. One of them had told the receptionist they didn't feel comfortable having their dental work done by someone who would treat their own son that way. Another had said they'd seen the videos online and felt it showed poor judgment. Luke said he needed to talk to my dad about this, but wanted to give me a heads up first. He said the practice couldn't afford to lose patients over family drama, and if it continued, they'd need to have a serious conversation about the partnership. I asked what kind of conversation. He said he didn't know yet, but that businesses run on reputation and trust. And right now, both were being damaged. I felt bad about that. I didn't want Luke's livelihood affected, but at the same time, my dad had made choices and choices have consequences. Luke said he understood my position, but asked if there was any way to resolve this privately before it impacted the business further. I told him my parents would have to make the first move toward resolution, and so far, they'd only escalated. Thursday, my parents made their move. They sent out their own letters. Not to everyone, just to key family members and a few of their closest friends. I know because my cousin Jeremy sent me a picture of the one his parents got. It was typed on my dad's professional letterhead, And it was something. The letter said they were heartbroken to have to address false allegations being spread by their son. It said they'd attempted to have a private conversation with me about concerns regarding my relationship before the wedding, that the conversation had gotten emotional, and that I'd twisted what happened into something unrecognizable. It said the documents I'd sent were either fabricated or misrepresented legitimate concerns they'd had. It said they'd always supported me, but that I'd become increasingly hostile to any feedback or guidance, and that they were now being punished for trying to protect me from a bad decision. The letter was careful. It didn't repeat the specific lies they'd told at the wedding. It just reframed everything as concerned parents trying to help their troubled son. It painted them as victims of my vindictiveness. And it was convincing if you didn't know the full story. Jeremy said his parents had read it and were now completely confused about what to believe. He said his dad had always respected my father and couldn't imagine him lying like I'd described, so maybe there was truth to the mental health concerns. Jeremy said he still believed me, but that the letter was effective at creating doubt. That made me angry. Not the frustrated anger from before, but the cold, focused kind. My parents weren't just defending themselves, they were actively trying to destroy my credibility, and they were doing it methodically. Friday, I decided to escalate on my end. I called my grandmother and asked if she'd be willing to make a statement to the family about the theft accusations. She said absolutely, that she'd been furious since she found out what my dad had said. She said she'd call a few key family members herself and set the record straight. She did exactly that. She called Aunt Linda, Uncle Ron, and a few of my dad's siblings. She told them directly that I'd never stolen anything from her, that she had no idea where that accusation came from, and that she was deeply disappointed in my father for saying it. She said if my dad was willing to lie about something that serious, what else was he lying about? That shook things up. Because Grandma is the family matriarch and people respect her. Her calling my dad a liar carried weight that my envelopes hadn't. My dad called her that evening and they had a massive fight. I wasn't there, but Aunt Linda told me later that she'd heard about it from my dad's brother. My dad had tried to explain that he'd exaggerated for effect, that he was trying to make a point about me making bad decisions. Grandma had told him that lying about your son stealing from his grandmother wasn't an exaggeration, it was a character assassination, and she wouldn't tolerate being used as a prop in his manipulation. My dad apparently tried to defend himself by saying I'd become impossible to reason with, that I wouldn't listen to any concerns about Marina, that they'd been desperate to stop the wedding. Grandma had asked why stopping the wedding was so important. My dad said because Marina's family was beneath us and he didn't want me tied to people like that. Grandma hung up on him. She called me right after and told me what he'd said. She was crying. She said she didn't raise her son to think he was better than other people based on their income or background. She said she was ashamed of him. That conversation hit different. Because my whole life I'd thought maybe I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't ambitious enough. Maybe I should have gone to medical school. Maybe my parents were right that I was disappointing. But hearing Grandma say she was ashamed of them, it validated everything I'd been feeling. Saturday morning, my parents showed up at my apartment again. I saw them through the peephole and almost didn't open the door, but they started knocking louder and my dad was calling my name through the door. My neighbor across the hall opened her door to see what was happening, so I let them in before it became a bigger scene. This time they were different. Not apologetic, but strategic. My dad sat down without asking and said we needed to talk about Thanksgiving. He said the family was expecting both of us to be there, and we needed to present a united front. I asked him if he was joking. He said he was serious. That family was family, and we needed to show everyone that we could be in the same room together. My mom said people were talking and the best way to stop the gossip was to appear normal. She said if we could just get through Thanksgiving without incident, it would go a long way toward calming everything down. She said we didn't have to resolve our differences privately, we just had to look civil publicly. I told them I wasn't interested in looking civil when nothing had been resolved. My dad said I was being stubborn and that my behavior was affecting the whole family. He said Grandma was upset, relatives were taking sides, and it was all because I couldn't let go of what happened at the wedding. He actually said, let go, like I should just forget about it. I asked him if he was planning to apologize. He said apologize for what? For trying to prevent me from making a mistake. I said for lying about me to 200 people. He said he didn't lie, he expressed concerns in a way that got people's attention. My mom added that if I'd listened to them before the wedding, none of this would have been necessary. They kept reframing it. Every time I brought up what they'd actually said at the wedding, they twisted it into something else. The theft accusation became expressing concern about my financial judgment. The firing from 12 jobs became pointing out my unstable career path. The cheating accusation became noting my pattern of failed relationships. They wouldn't own any of it. I told them to leave. My dad said he wasn't leaving until we agreed on how to handle Thanksgiving. I said there was nothing to agree on, that I'd be there and they could be there or not, their choice. My mom said I was tearing the family apart. I said they tore the family apart when they destroyed my wedding. She said I was being dramatic and that the wedding situation had been an unfortunate escalation of a legitimate concern. An unfortunate escalation. That's how she described publicly calling me a thief and a cheater. The argument went in circles for almost an hour. They wanted me to agree to act normal at Thanksgiving. I wanted them to admit they'd lied. Neither side would budge. Finally, my dad stood up and said fine. We'd all be at Thanksgiving and we'd see what happened. He said it like a threat. After they left, I sat there trying to figure out their angle. They weren't trying to reconcile. They were trying to control the narrative. They wanted to show up at Thanksgiving looking like the reasonable parents dealing with their difficult son. They wanted to make me look like the problem in front of the extended family. Sunday, I got a message from Marina's sister Bianca again. She said her family was also planning their Thanksgiving and that Marina had said she wasn't going because she couldn't handle being around people asking about the wedding. Bianca said their parents were upset because Marina missing Thanksgiving would draw more attention to everything. She said their mom had looked at all the documents I sent again and was starting to think maybe my parents really had lied, but their dad was still convinced there was something wrong with me because why else would parents do that? Bianca said Marina had asked about me. Not directly, but she'd asked Bianca if I'd been reaching out, if I'd been posting anything on social media, if I seemed okay. Bianca had told her I seemed fine but angry. Marina had apparently just nodded and not said anything else. That killed me. Marina was thinking about me but still wouldn't unblock me or reach out. Bianca said Marina was scared. Not of me, but of everything. She said Marina had been humiliated at her own wedding, dragged away in front of everyone she knew, and now she didn't know what was real. She said Marina had loved me, but the wedding had broken something and she didn't know how to fix it. I asked Bianca if there was any chance Marina would talk to me. She said, not right now, that Marina needed time to process everything. I said it had been over a month. Bianca said trauma doesn't work on a timeline and Marina was still dealing with what happened. She said maybe after the holidays when things calmed down, but not now. Monday, my dad's practice situation got worse. Luke called and said they'd lost 2 more patients and one of them had left a review online. Not on the practice's page, but on my dad's personal profile on a dental review site. The review said they'd been a patient for 5 years, but after seeing how he treated his own family, they couldn't trust him professionally. It mentioned the wedding videos. It said anyone who would publicly destroy their son's reputation couldn't be trusted with patients' health. Luke said they needed to address this immediately. He said he'd tried to get the review taken down, but it didn't violate the site's policies because it was based on public information. He said my dad was devastated and was talking about taking a leave of absence from the practice. I asked what that would mean for the business. Luke said it would be difficult, but manageable, that he could bring in a temporary associate dentist to cover my dad's patients. I felt weird about that. I hadn't wanted to destroy my dad's career. I just wanted him to face consequences for what he did to me. But now his professional reputation was crumbling and I was part of the reason why. Not the direct reason. He'd done this by attacking me publicly, but the envelopes I'd sent had amplified it. Luke asked if I'd consider talking to my dad about making a public apology or statement that might help repair things. I said my dad wouldn't apologize, that he'd rather lose patience than admit he was wrong. Luke said that was what he was afraid of. He said pride was going to cost my dad everything if he didn't figure out how to back down. Tuesday, my mom's interior design situation also got messy. Apparently, one of her former clients saw the wedding videos and shared them in a local design community Facebook group. Someone had asked if anyone had worked with her, and the former client had said she'd been difficult and controlling, and that the wedding videos showed her true personality. Several other people commented saying they'd had similar experiences with my mom being demanding and unreasonable. My Aunt Linda called to tell me because she'd seen the Facebook posts. She said my mom was mortified and had called her crying about how I'd destroyed her reputation in the design community. I pointed out I hadn't posted anything on Facebook. Aunt Linda said I might as well have since the wedding videos had spread far enough that people were connecting them to my parents professionally. She said my mom was talking about taking legal action against people sharing the videos. I said the videos were recorded at a public event by multiple people. There was no reasonable expectation of privacy. Aunt Linda said my mom wasn't being reasonable. She was desperate. She said my parents' whole world was falling apart and they were lashing out in every direction. I asked Aunt Linda whose fault that was. She said it didn't matter whose fault it was, that the family needed to come together and fix this before it got worse. She said Thanksgiving was in 2 days, and it was going to be a disaster if everyone showed up with this much tension. She begged me to consider skipping it, just this once, to avoid the confrontation. I told her no. I'd done nothing wrong and I wasn't hiding while my parents faced no real consequences. She said losing patience and getting bad reviews was a consequence, and maybe that should be enough. I said it wasn't enough because they still hadn't admitted they lied or apologized. She said I was never going to get that apology and I needed to accept it and move on. I asked why I was the one who always had to move on while my parents just kept doing whatever they wanted. She didn't have an answer for that. Thanksgiving is Thursday. My parents will be there. I'll be there. Half the family thinks I'm right and half thinks I'm crazy. My dad's business partner is watching his practice fall apart. My mom's design reputation is tanking. Marina still won't talk to me, but her sister says she's asking about me. And I have one more move planned that nobody sees coming. Because if my parents think showing up at Thanksgiving and playing Happy Family is going to fix this, they're about to learn exactly how wrong they are. I'm done playing defense. It's time to go on offense. Final update. Holy hell, Reddit. Thanksgiving happened, and it was everything I hoped for and more. Buckle up because this is long and it gets intense. So Thanksgiving was at my Uncle Ron's house like always. Big family gathering, about 30 people total, including extended family, significant others, kids. Everyone knew about the drama. Everyone had chosen sides or was trying to stay neutral. The tension was already there before anyone even arrived. I showed up at 2 p.m. when Ron had said dinner would be at 3 p.m. I wanted to be there early, settled in, not walking into a room full of people staring at me. My parents hadn't arrived yet. Good. I needed time to set things up. My Aunt Linda was in the kitchen with Ron's wife helping with food prep. She saw me and immediately got this uncomfortable look. She asked if I was sure I wanted to be there. I said absolutely. She said my parents were definitely coming, and she was worried about what might happen. I told her not to worry, that I was planning to be on my best behavior. That was technically true. I was planning to behave exactly as I'd intended to. My cousin Jeremy showed up next with his parents. Jeremy gave me a hug and said he was glad I came. His parents nodded at me but didn't come over to talk. They'd gotten my dad's letter and apparently were still processing everything. My grandmother arrived about 20 minutes later and made a point of coming straight to me, hugging me, asking how I was holding up. She was cold to my Uncle Ron when he tried to make small talk with her. Everyone noticed. More family filtered in. My dad's siblings and their families. A few of my mom's relatives. Everyone was being weirdly polite and formal. Not like our usual Thanksgivings where people are loud and casual. The elephant in the room was massive, and nobody wanted to acknowledge it. My parents arrived at 2:45 p.m. Together, dressed nicely, my mom carrying a pie she'd made, playing the part of the perfect couple. They saw me immediately, and I watched my dad's jaw tighten. My mom's smile was forced, but they came in, greeted Ron and Linda, started making their rounds saying hello to family members, acting completely normal. My dad shook hands with his brothers. My mom hugged her sister. They were working the room like politicians. I could see the strategy, show up looking composed and reasonable, make me look like the unstable one if I caused any problems. Grandma was sitting in the living room and my parents had to pass by her to get to the dining area. My dad stopped and said hello to her. She looked at him and said she wasn't sure they should be talking right now. My dad said she was his mother and, of course, they should talk. She said she'd raised him better than to lie about his own son, and until he could admit what he'd done, they didn't have much to say to each other. Several people heard that exchange. The room got quieter. My dad said they could discuss it privately later. Grandma said there was nothing private about what he'd done at the wedding, so why should the conversation about it be private? My dad walked away without responding. Dinner was called at 3:15 p.m. Everyone gathered around Ron's extended dining table and the extra card table set up in the living room. Seating was awkward because nobody wanted to sit too close to either me or my parents. I ended up at the main table with Grandma, Jeremy, Aunt Linda, and a few others. My parents were at the other end with Uncle Ron and his family. We said grace. Ron gave a little speech about being thankful for family even in difficult times. Everyone started eating. Conversation was stilted and weird. People were being careful about what they said. My mom talked about her latest design project with Ron's wife. My dad discussed golf with one of his brothers. Surface level stuff. Nothing real. I waited until everyone had been eating for about 15 minutes. Then I stood up with my wine glass like I was going to make a toast. The table got quiet. My dad looked at me with this warning expression. My mom's face went pale. I said I wanted to thank everyone for coming today despite everything that had been happening in our family. I said I knew it had been uncomfortable and confusing and that people didn't know what to believe. I said I appreciated everyone who'd reached out to me or taken the time to look at the information I'd sent. Then I said there was something I needed to address while everyone was here together, because I was tired of things being said in private and through letters and phone calls. My dad said this wasn't the time or place. I said actually it was exactly the time and place since he'd chosen a public venue with 200 witnesses to destroy my reputation. So I figured a family Thanksgiving with 30 people was appropriate for the truth. Uncle Ron tried to interrupt and say we should keep Thanksgiving drama-free. I said I agreed completely, and that's why I wanted to clear this up once and for all, so we could move forward. Grandma told Ron to let me speak. Ron sat back down. I looked directly at my parents and asked them to tell everyone here exactly what they'd said about me at the wedding, word for word, if they could remember. My dad said this was inappropriate. I said no, what was inappropriate was lying about your son to 200 people and then never owning it. My mom said they'd already explained their reasoning in the letter they'd sent. I said the letter was more lies and reframing, and I wanted them to say out loud in front of Grandma and everyone else exactly what they'd accused me of. My dad said I was being manipulative and trying to embarrass them. I said I was asking them to repeat their own words, and if they were embarrassed by those words, maybe that said something about the words themselves. Grandma said she wanted to hear this too. She said she'd heard bits and pieces, but she wanted to know exactly what had been said about her grandson. My mom started crying. The calculated kind of crying meant to make people feel sorry for her. She said they'd been concerned parents trying to protect me, and I was twisting everything. I said I wasn't twisting anything. I was asking them to repeat what they'd said. My dad said they'd expressed concerns about my relationship and my life choices in a moment of emotional intensity. I asked if telling 200 people I'd stolen $50,000 from Grandma was expressing concern or making an accusation. My dad said that was taken out of context. I asked what context makes accusing your son of theft acceptable. He didn't answer. I asked if they'd told people I'd been fired from 12 jobs. My mom said they'd been trying to illustrate a pattern. I said there was no pattern because it wasn't true, and I'd sent everyone documentation proving it. Jeremy's dad spoke up and said he'd seen the employment verification letters and they seemed legitimate. My dad said I could have fabricated those. I asked him if he was seriously suggesting I'd forged letters from multiple companies on their letterhead with verifiable contact information. He said he didn't know what I was capable of anymore. Grandma stood up at that point. She was furious. She told my dad that was enough, that she wasn't going to sit there and watch him assassinate my character a second time. She said she'd given him the chance to come clean and apologize, and instead he'd sent letters trying to make me look mentally unstable. She said she'd called every person my dad had sent a letter to and told them the truth, that I'd never stolen from her, that she had no idea where that accusation came from, and that her son had lied for reasons she still didn't understand. My dad tried to interrupt, but Grandma kept going. She said she'd been thinking about this for weeks, and the only explanation she could come up with was that my dad was so obsessed with status and appearances that he couldn't handle his son marrying someone he deemed beneath us. She said my dad had always been concerned with what people thought, with having the right friends and the right connections, and that apparently he'd been willing to destroy my life to maintain his image of what our family should look like. My mom said that wasn't fair. Grandma said it was completely fair because my mom had stood right there next to my dad and participated in every lie. She asked my mom how she could accuse me of cheating on every woman I dated when she knew that wasn't true. My mom said they'd been trying to make Marina's family see that the relationship wasn't stable. Grandma asked why Marina's family's opinion mattered more than the truth. Uncle Ron tried to calm things down again, but multiple people told him to stop. Jeremy said he wanted to hear this. Aunt Linda said the family needed to have this conversation. My dad's brother said he'd been wondering the same things as Grandma and wanted answers. My dad stood up and said he wasn't going to sit there and be attacked at a family holiday. He said everything they'd done had been because they loved me and wanted what was best for me. And if I couldn't understand that, then there was nothing more to discuss. He started to walk away from the table. I asked him if Marina's family being beneath us was what was best for me. He stopped walking. I asked if destroying my relationship because her father manages a tire shop instead of a medical practice was what was best for me. I asked if lying about me being a thief and a cheater and a failure was supposed to help me somehow. My dad turned around and said yes. It was supposed to help me see that I was making a mistake. He said Marina was a nice enough girl, but she came from nothing and had no ambition and I could do better. He said I could have married someone from a good family, someone educated, someone who would have elevated our family's standing instead of bringing it down. There it was, finally. After all the reframing and excuses and justifications, he'd actually said it. Marina wasn't good enough because her family wasn't rich enough, educated enough, connected enough. Multiple people started talking at once. Jeremy's mom said she couldn't believe he just said that. My dad's sister said that was the most elitist garbage she'd ever heard. Ron's wife said her family wasn't wealthy either and asked if my dad looked down on her too. My dad tried to backtrack and say that wasn't what he meant. Grandma said it was exactly what he meant and she was disgusted. She said she'd raised him in a regular middle-class home, that his father had been a regular dentist without the fancy practice my dad had now, and that somewhere along the way my dad had forgotten where he came from. She said he'd become the kind of person who measured worth by bank accounts and zip codes, and she didn't recognize him anymore. My mom jumped in and said they'd worked hard for what they had, and there was nothing wrong with wanting their son to have opportunities. Grandma said there was everything wrong with destroying your son's happiness because his fiance's family didn't meet your social standards. She said Marina had been a lovely girl, and they'd rejected her based on snobbery and nothing else. My dad said we were all ganging up on them. I said no. They were finally facing questions they should have answered 5 weeks ago. I said they'd destroyed my wedding, ruined my relationship, lied about me to everyone I knew, and they'd never once admitted they were wrong or apologized. I said they doubled down and tried to make me look crazy instead of owning what they did. My mom was crying harder now, but people weren't sympathizing. Aunt Linda looked disappointed. Jeremy's parents looked uncomfortable. My dad's siblings were shaking their heads. My parents had lost the room. My dad made one last attempt. He said fine, maybe they'd handled things badly at the wedding. Maybe they'd been too harsh, but their concerns about Marina were still valid. And I'd understand someday when I was older and had more life experience. He said parents make hard choices and sometimes kids don't appreciate those choices until years later. I asked him if he appreciated that his hard choices had cost him patience. He went very still. I said yes, I knew about the patients leaving his practice, about the reviews mentioning the wedding, about his business partner considering bringing in someone else to cover his clients. I asked if destroying my wedding and lying about me had been worth losing his professional reputation. Luke had told me that information in confidence, but I was done protecting my father. My dad asked how I knew about that. I said people talk and word spreads, just like the wedding videos had spread. I asked if the hard choice to publicly humiliate me had been worth watching his dental practice fall apart. My dad's face went red. He said I'd done that I'd sent those envelopes and destroyed his reputation. I said he'd destroyed his own reputation by attacking his son at a wedding in front of 200 people with cameras. I said if he'd handled his concerns privately like a normal person, none of this would have happened. I said the envelopes had just provided facts. The damage to his reputation came from his own actions being exposed. Several family members asked what was happening with the dental practice. My dad said it was nothing, just a few patients being dramatic. But his brother asked him directly if he was losing patients. My dad admitted some people had expressed concerns. His brother asked how many. My dad said it didn't matter. His brother said it clearly mattered if it was affecting the business. The conversation spiraled from there. Family members asking my parents why they'd done this, asking if they'd really prioritized social status over my happiness, asking why they couldn't have just talked to me privately about their concerns. My parents trying to defend themselves but sounding weaker each time. Grandma staying firm that what they'd done was wrong and unforgivable unless they admitted it and apologized. My dad eventually said fine. Maybe they'd made mistakes in how they handled things. Not that what they did was wrong, just that the execution had been flawed. My mom agreed they could have approached things differently. Still not an actual apology. Still not admitting the lies were lies. I said that wasn't good enough. I said until they could say out loud that they'd lied about me, that everything they'd said at the wedding was false, that they'd fabricated accusations to destroy my relationship, I was done with them. I said I didn't need parents who would sacrifice their son's happiness for their social standing. Grandma said she agreed with me. She said my parents needed to do some serious thinking about their values and their priorities. She said she loved them, but she couldn't support what they'd done. And until they made it right, she couldn't have a normal relationship with them either. That hit my dad hard. You could see it on his face. His mother, choosing his son's side over his. Other family members were nodding along with Grandma. My parents had come to Thanksgiving thinking they could present a united front and win people over. Instead, they'd been forced to defend themselves and lost badly. Dinner was pretty much over after that. People were uncomfortable. Some of my relatives came over to me privately and said they believed me and supported me. A few told my parents they needed to figure this out. My parents left early. My mom still crying. My dad looking defeated. I stayed and helped clean up. Jeremy told me he was glad I'd confronted them directly. Aunt Linda said she wished it hadn't come to that, but she understood why I'd done it. Grandma hugged me and said she was proud of me for standing up for myself. Here's where things stand now. 3 days after Thanksgiving, my parents haven't contacted me. Multiple family members have told them they need to make this right. My dad's practice situation is getting worse. Jeremy's dad knows someone who works at the dental office, and word is they're down to about 60% of their normal patient load. My mom has apparently stopped taking new design clients because she's afraid of the damage to her reputation. The wedding videos are still out there. The family knows the truth. My parents' social standing has taken a massive hit. They lost the respect of people they cared about. Their business reputations are damaged. Grandma is disappointed in them, and they still haven't apologized. As for Marina, her sister Bianca messaged me yesterday. She said Marina watched some of the Thanksgiving stuff unfold. Apparently one of my cousins is friends with one of Marina's cousins and word traveled. Marina knows I confronted my parents publicly. Marina knows they finally admitted the real reason they did what they did. Marina knows I've been fighting to clear my name this entire time. Bianca said Marina unblocked me on Instagram. Just Instagram, not my phone number yet. But it's something. She hasn't messaged me, but I can see she looked at my profile. Maybe she's processing everything. Maybe she needs more time. Maybe she's done for good, and this is just closure for her. I don't know what happens next with Marina. I spent 5 weeks fighting to prove my parents lied, and now that everyone knows they lied, I realize that might not be enough to fix what they broke. Marina's trust was shattered. Her dream wedding became a nightmare. I can't undo that even if my parents admitted everything tomorrow.